Hello class, and welcome back to the Great Texts Hour. We're going to be covering books 7, 8, and 9 of the Aeneid today. We're not going to be covering them in great detail. There's so much going on in these books, but we're only going to cherry pick a few important themes that tie into the rest of the course. So just a few things, first of all, about 7, 8, and 9. Notice that we have now entered the Iliadic portion of the Aeneid. Books 1 through 6, where he is journeying, are a lot like the Odyssey. But books 7 to 12 of the Aeneid are a lot like the Iliad, because they describe war. Senseless war. War that is driven by the fury and pettiness of the gods. It's already been foreordained that the Trojans will unite with the native Latins and eventually become Romans. We know this is part of Almighty Jove's plan to bring peace on earth. But Juno, a woman scorned, furious and insanely jealous of the fact that her Carthaginians are eventually going to get wiped out, keeps trying to sow as much destruction and discord as she possibly can. And so we see a lot of the recurring theme of reason and the passions. Reason, for example, arranges for a marriage between Aeneas and the princess daughter of the Latins. Notice it is a political alliance. There is no love. Aeneas does not love her. His love is for Dido, but he moves on. So there's supposed to be this marriage, but they have to break off the previous engagement with the Latin prince Turnus. Turnus is the Achilles in the story, because he is so proud and so ferocious, and his pride can be extremely destructive. This is a guy who is so thumotic that when they tell him, hey, we've got this really reasonable offer, we're going to generously compensate you, it's for the good of your country, his personal pride is so wounded that he can't even answer. He's practically just foaming at the mouth. He's so furious. This is like Mr. Thumos, Turnus is. So he's a perfect contrast again with Aeneas, whose Thumos is controlled by pietas. He is always self-restrained. He somehow is able to keep his passions in check. But you see several incidents in books 7 through 9 where the passions are unleashed and they destroy the good designs of reason. Queen Amata is possessed by this weird snake. The Furies come in and drive her insane, and she whips up discord. Remember Queen Arete in the Odyssey? Queen Excellence. The names are significant in the Aeneid as well. Queen Amata, Queen Beloved, Queen possessed by love, but not in a good way, because love, divorced from reason, is destructive and self-destructive. So book 7 gives us a lot of examples of the passions being stirred up by reason. But I'd like to focus on book 8, because book 8 contains an amazing portrayal of a shield. It is a shield made by Vulcan, who has a crush on Venus, and so when she asks for this favor, he's only too happy to provide. And the shield, of course, is very similar to the shield of Achilles that we read about in the Iliad. But this is an amazing shield. It's a shield designed for Aeneas, but it has future battle scenes from Roman history. And the center panel of this battle scene, of this shield, is a naval battle scene. The Battle of Actium. This took place in 31 BC, and it was the turning point of the Roman civil wars. When this battle was over, Octavius, who would go on to be named Augustus Caesar, was the undisputed master of the Roman world. So Octavius, or Augustus, fought against the combined forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Cleopatra was the seductive queen of Egypt, and Mark Antony was a former friend of Julius Caesar. And the glue that held these two together was passion. Cleopatra had seduced Julius Caesar, and then he got assassinated, and so now she went on to seduce Mark Antony. And the idea was that their combined forces, the Egyptians and Mark Antony's Roman soldiers, would overcome Augustus Caesar, or Octavius at the time, and they would then be the rulers of the Roman world. This was a colossal battle. Octavius had something like 400 ships and 80,000 troops. And the forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra had 500 ships and 70,000 troops. Think of those statistics. This is a huge, huge battle. And these two mighty forces met in the Mediterranean. The fighting got really, really thick. And for reasons that to this day remain unclear, even though there was no clear victor at the time, Cleopatra panicked. And she thought, uh-oh, we're losing. I need to recoup my losses, save what Egyptian ships I have, in order to protect Egypt should the Romans come after me. And so Cleopatra cuts bait. And she orders her navy to follow her flagship back home. Mark Antony's fighting on the ships, waging war. He turns around, he sees his lover hightailing it out of there. He turns his ship around and follows her out of the battle as well. Well, when Mark Antony's troops see that, they say to themselves, to heck with this. We're not fighting for a loser. We're not fighting for a guy who runs out of the battle. And they immediately stop the battle and pledge their loyalty to Octavius. Why is this so important? Not only historically, but metaphorically from Vergil's perspective. Isn't it obvious? Mark Antony and Cleopatra represent the passions, whereas Octavius represents the ironclad rule of reason. And this marks, this Battle of Actium, the triumph, at least a temporary triumph, of reason over the passions. This is also a moral allegory of where the passions will get you. You think the passions are a strong glue? Well, wait until they turn the heat up, and you'll see that glue melt in the thick of battle. Passion may seem like a very strong incentive, like a very strong bond, but it is not. It does not have the staying power of dispassionate reason. Aeneas is looking at this magnificent shield and has no idea what any of it means. Vergil says he stared at it in Notions. ignorant. Oh, how could he not be ignorant, right? He doesn't know the future. Yes, Anchises gave him sort of a brief overview, but he himself does not know. He is not a knower, Aeneas. He's a truster, and that's good. But he's not very philosophical, is he? That's interesting. We'll have to revisit that point later. But first, let's move to Book 9. Okay. There are a lot of things going on in Book 9 as well. We're just going to focus on two, again, just to give us a sense of how the big themes emerge in the Aeneid. The first thing I would like us to discuss is the friendship of Nisus and Euryalus. Do those names sound familiar to you? Those were the two cheaters from the foot race in Book 5 when we saw the funeral games in honor of Anchises. There is some speculation that this very, very close friendship of Nisus and Euryalus was homoerotic, that this was a homosexual affair. Scholars debate as to whether or not that is true. The Romans did not approve of homosexuality, certainly not at least in the way that the Greeks did. Pederasty was an established part of the elite culture of ancient Greece. But in some respects, it doesn't matter. Vergil's point is that passions that get too strong short-circuit reason. Whether they are erotic passions or platonic passions, the point is irrational passions unguided by reason are deadly. And you see this in the case of Nisus and Euryalus. Remember the situation. Aeneas has left the camp briefly, the Trojan camp. Turnus is attacking, and the Trojans are frustrated because once again they are holed up behind a walled city while the enemy is outside attacking. This is eerily similar, and it's kind of driving them crazy. Euryalus and Nisus are extremely eager for honor and glory, and so they hatch upon an extremely bold plan, which is to sneak into the enemy camp at night and just start killing people. That is definitely one way to get your name in the papers. But look at the conversation that the two of them had. I mentioned this quote a couple classes ago. This is on page 218, book 9, around line 240. Nisus says, "Euryalus, is it the gods who put this fire in our minds, or is it that each man's relentless longing becomes a god to him?" That is the $20,000 question. Are the gods responsible for our passions, or do we make our passions our God? Long has my heart been keen for battle or some mighty act. It cannot be content with peace or rest. And so, struck by a great passion for praise, Nisus and Euryalus embark on this crazy scheme. And, of course, they die. Euryalus I should stop right there and say, so notice Vergil is also pointing out the danger of the excessive desire for honor. The passions can be erotic, appetitive, but they can also be thumotic. This was an excessive desire for praise, an excessive desire for recognition and honor that led to tragedy, just like Dido and Aeneas' love led to tragedy. The passions are, when unchecked and unguided by reason, tragic. And so they die. And the enemy puts their heads on a pike. And Euryalus' mother sees this. Imagine being a mom, seeing your son's head on a pike. And she weeps. And her weeping, her words are so moving that both sides of the battle just stop. Their limbs grow slack. They're so despondent when they hear a mother mourn the loss of her son. Vergil had a tremendous sensitivity to human sorrow and human suffering. He also had a way of immortalizing it. Notice what he says on page 226. Nisus and Euryalus wanted their names to live on forever because of this excessive desire for praise. Vergil basically says, you're in luck because I'm going to write about you. Fortunate pair, if there be any power within my poetry, no day shall ever erase you from the memory of time, not while Aeneas' children lived beside the Capitol's unchanging rock, nor while a Roman father still holds sovereignty. As long as there is a Roman Empire, there will be my poetry, and it will immortalize you. Not very modest, but actually he undersold himself because the Roman Empire is dead and gone, and yet what are we doing 2,000 years later? We are still reading Vergil's account of Nisus and Euryalus. The other little vignette I wanted to draw your attention to in Book 9 is the fight between Numanus and Ascanius, who is Aeneas' son. And this starts on page 231, around line 800. Numanus is outside and he wants to fight. He wants the Trojans to come out and fight, but they have strict orders not to leave this embankment in which they are encamped. And so he tries to tease them out, to taunt them. And this is a fascinating sort of political or sociological overview that we get from this speech. Twice conquered Phrygians, Trojans, are you not ashamed to be hemmed in again by siege and ramparts, to set up walls between yourselves and death? Look at those who want to take our brides by battle. What god brought you to Italy, or what insanity? Do not expect to find the sons of Atreus here, or fable-babbling Ulysses, but a race from sturdy stock. For first we bear our infants to the river and harden them by cruel frost and water. And then our boys grow keen in hunting, ranging the forests, and their sports are breaking horses and aiming arrows from their bows. As youths, they learn frugality and patient labor, and tame the earth with harrows or compel defiant towns to tremble. All our life is spent with steel. Before I go on, do you recognize that description? What ancient peoples took their infants to the river and plunged them in the icy waters? This is a description of the Spartans. The Spartans were legendary. And notice what Vergil is doing. He's taking this kind of Spartan profile and he is applying it to the Latins. So just kind of put a pin in that and think about that. Anyway, Numanus goes on bragging, and then he turns to the twice conquered Phrygians and says, but you wear robes of saffron, ornamented in gleaming purple. You like laziness, and you delight in dances, and your tunics have sleeves, and your bonnets have ribbons. You indeed are Phrygian women, hardly Phrygian men. Now go, prance through high Dindima, there where the twin-mouthed pipes delight familiar ears. The timbrel and the Berecynthian flute of Ida's mother summon you to revels. Leave arms to men. You've had enough of swords. Whoa, some pretty heavy machismo, accusing the Trojans of being effeminate. The reason why it's easy to accuse the Trojans of being effeminate is that for most of Western history, the East was always more advanced than the West. The West is where you had the rubes, the cavemen, the rednecks. The East is where you had refinement, civilization, culture, robes, ribbons, dances. So the Trojans are from the East. They are more advanced. They are more refined than the Latins. But what the Latins have on their side is simply rustic toughness. So it's interesting that these are actually the two ancestors of the Romans, right? Because the Trojans and the Latins are going to come together to form the Roman race. In other words, the Romans are going to be the best of both worlds. They will have the toughness of the Spartans or the Latins, but they will also have the refinement and the civilization of the Trojans. And of course, Vergil lets the Trojans have the last word. For Ascanius has his first kill. He draws back his bow, prays to Jupiter, shoots the arrow, and it goes right through the temples of Numanus. Go now, Ascanius says, mock our bravery with words that taunt. This is the answer sent by twice defeated Phrygians back to the Rutulians. He said no more.